Okay, let's unpack this. We are diving into, well, arguably, the single biggest mystery out there. In all of science, all of philosophy, really.
You mean the hard problem of consciousness?
Exactly. And this isn't just, how the brain works on a mechanical level. It's the baffling struggle. How do you explain subjective felt experience?
The qualia.
Yeah, the qualia.
Yeah.
The actual taste of coffee or feeling sad or seeing red. How does that arise from just stuff, from non-conscious physical matter?
Right. And for centuries, the standard view, the materialist orthodoxy, has basically insisted that mind must somehow emerge from the brain. It has to, right?
That's the assumption.
But they have no real mechanism for it. I mean, none that holds up. The hard problem, it remains completely unsolved, doesn't it?
Completely. Dead end in many ways.
And that failure, that's what's pushed some really brilliant minds, people working today, to ask this truly radical question.
Which is?
What if we've got the whole relationship, mind and matter, completely backward?
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, folks. We're basically charting a course here, away from that materialist orthodoxy. And we're doing it by exploring the combined work of 5, highly influential, but also incredibly diverse thinkers.
A really fascinating group.
Totally. We've got a philosopher, Bernardo Kastrup, a cognitive scientist, Donald Hoffman.
The inventor of the microprocessor, Federico Faggin.
Which is amazing in itself.
Right. Then there's the metalogic polymath Chris Langan, and even, the novelist Dan Brown.
Who acts as a sort of cultural mirror for these ideas, doesn't he?
He really does. He brings these complex themes into the mainstream.
And this isn't just like an interesting academic exercise. It's more like a convergence. You have these figures coming from such different places.
Logic, engineering, evolution, philosophy.
Exactly. And they've all somehow arrived at this one really stunning shared conclusion.
Which is, consciousness is fundamental.
Yes. It's the core ingredient, the basic stuff of existence. The physical world, they argue. It's not the source, it's the result, the consequence. Wow. Okay, so our mission today for this deep dive, we're going to take this incredible stack of sources and really, get into it.
Lay it all out.
First, we're going to unpack their shared anti-materialist consensus. Look at the arguments, the science, the logic they use to say consciousness is primary, the ontological primitive.
Right, the basic building block.
Then second, we'll look at the metaphors, because they use these powerful but actually quite accessible analogies, don't they?
They have to explain the illusion. Things like user interfaces, dissociated alters.
Self-writing language, all that stuff, to explain why the world seems so solid and material if it isn't, fundamentally.
Exactly. And then finally, the really mind-bending part. We're going to connect this modern metaphysical shift, this inversion, directly to ancient spiritual wisdom.
Specifically looking at the Bible, those striking parallels between the unseen spiritual realm and the temporary material world.
It's a fascinating connection.
So yeah, get ready, because we are basically inverting reality from the ground up today.
Okay, so we absolutely have to start with the core commitment they all share, which is this fundamental rejection of physicalism or materialism.
Right. And just for anyone listening who maybe isn't steeped in philosophy, physicalism is basically the idea that physical matter, atoms, energy, fields, that's the only real thing, or at least the primary thing.
And if you think your brain creates your mind, your consciousness,
yeah,
that's a physicalist viewpoint.
Pretty much the default assumption for a lot of people, I think.
It has been for a long time. But our 5 sources here, they all agree. Physicalism just fails. It fundamentally cannot account for subjective experience, the feel of life.
That hard problem again.
Always comes back to that.
Yeah.
So their response is this radical inversion you mentioned.
They flip the hierarchy.
Completely. They assert that consciousness is the ontological primitive.
Okay, let's break that down. Ontological primitive, meaning?
Meaning it's the single foundational ingredient, the bedrock, the thing from which everything else is built or emerges.
So if consciousness is primary,
then the brain doesn't create consciousness. It's more like consciousness creates or maybe uses the brain.
Okay, that's a huge shift.
It hits everything. And think about it. Once you accept, even just hypothetically, that consciousness is the irreducible primary reality,
Then the hard problem.
it just dissolves, vanishes instantly. It's no longer a puzzle of how dead matter creates mind. The question becomes totally different.
It becomes, how does this primary mind, this mind at large, create the appearance of dead matter? and the appearance of separate individuals like you and me.
Exactly. That's the new problem to solve, and it's a very different kind of problem.
So let's break down how each of these thinkers tackles that. They all agree consciousness is primary, but they have slightly different flavors, right? Different mechanisms.
They do. Let's start with Bernardo Kastrup. He's probably the leading voice right now for what he calls analytic idealism.
Analyte idealism.
His model is, as you said earlier, really streamlined, elegant even. He posits that reality rests entirely in a single universal consciousness.
Just one.
Just one. He calls it mind at large, or sometimes cosmic consciousness. That's the only thing that actually exists, fundamentally. It's pure subjectivity, pure experience.
Okay, but then, the obvious question, if there's only one mind, why do you and I feel like separate people? Why do we have our own private thoughts, feelings?
That's the key, isn't it? And Kastrup uses this brilliant psychological analogy, dissociation.
Like dissociative identity disorder.
Sort of, but on a cosmic scale. He argues that individual egos, you, me, every conscious being, are like dissociated altars. We're segmented, fragmented aspects of that one universal mind.
So our individuality is a kind of partition within the whole.
Exactly. A localized eddy in the stream of cosmic consciousness. And this is crucial for understanding the physical world in his model.
Go on.
The physical world object space-time Kastrup calls this the extrinsic appearance of mental activity within mind at large.
Extrinsic appearance, meaning what it looks like from the outside.
Kind of. It's what the internal mental processes of the universal mind look like when they're observed from across one of those dissociative boundaries, from the perspective of one of us alters.
Wow. So matter isn't fundamental stuff. It's the appearance of universal thought patterns viewed from a limited perspective.
You got it. That provides a mechanism for the appearance of a physical world without needing matter itself to be the fundamental reality.
Okay, mind blown already. Let's shift gears from philosophy to, well, cognitive science and evolution with Donald Hoffman. How does he get to a similar place?
Hoffman's approach is fascinating because he uses math, specifically evolutionary game theory.
Right.
He mathematically demonstrates pretty rigorously that evolution cannot select for perceptions that accurately report objective truth. The probability is essentially zero.
Wait, evolution doesn't favor seeing reality as it is. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But think about it. Evolution only favors perceptions that maximize what he calls fitness payoffs.
Things that help us survive and reproduce.
Exactly. And perceptions that maximize payoffs are almost never the ones that accurately depict the complex structure of objective reality. Seeing the truth might be too complex, too slow, too metabolically expensive.
So the world we see, the space, the time, the objects, it's not the real world.
According to Hoffman, not even close. It's an illusion, a useful fiction, optimized purely for survival.
So what is real for Hoffman then?
His true reality, what he calls conscious realism, consists of a vast, complex network of interacting conscious agents.
Conscious agents, like little units of consciousness.
Sort of. Fundamentally, reality is just these agents and their interactions. The physical objects we perceive, chairs, tables, planets, they aren't fundamental. They're just iconic representations.
Icons, like on a computer desktop.
Precisely like that. They're like user interface icons that represent the underlying dynamics of this conscious agent network. They're functional, they let us interact successfully, but they are not truthful depictions of what's really there.
Okay, I have to jump in here because I know listeners will be thinking this. If reality isn't real, if it's just this interface, how do we build particle accelerators? How does quantum physics work so well? How do we send probes to Mars? Our physics seems incredibly accurate about the physical world.
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's a really important challenge. Hoffman's response would be that the consistency of the interface is what allows for predictability in technology.
Consistency?
Yeah. Think about that desktop icon again. Maybe it's a blue W icon for a document. That icon doesn't look anything like the complex code and magnetic charges on your hard drive, right?
Not at all.
But every time you click it, the same program opens, the same document appears. It's reliable. It's consistent. You can learn its rules, predict its behavior, even build complex software that interacts with it because it's consistent.
So our physics, it's basically describing the consistent rules of the user interface, not the underlying reality of conscious agents.
That's exactly Hoffman's point. Physics explores the reliable patterns within the interface. It's incredibly powerful for manipulating the interface, but it tells us virtually nothing about the reality behind the interface. It's a reliable tool, not a window onto fundamental truth.
That distinction reliable tool versus fundamental truth, that feels like a really powerful way to frame this whole idealist perspective.
Okay, let's bring in Federico Faggin. This is fascinating because, he co-created the microprocessor. He knows hardware, complexity, computation from the inside out.
And yet, he rejects materialism. It's quite a story. Faggin argues really forcefully that his entire career in computation led him to the inescapable conclusion that computation alone cannot create consciousness.
Why not? Computers are getting incredibly complex.
Because of qualia, subjective experience, the feeling of red, the sound of a trumpet. He argues that these are fundamentally unobservable, non-computational phenomena. You can't program feeling.
So consciousness for him is something else entirely. Yes. He views it as an irreducible, fundamental property of the universe. Just like mass or spin or electrical charge. It simply is. It's not something that emerges from complexity. It's a basic ingredient, possibly linked to quantum phenomena in some deep way.
And the brain, which he understands as hardware.
He sees the brain as an incredibly complex tool, yes. But consciousness is the user, the subjective, non-computational driver operating the machine.
And the material world itself.
For Faggin, the material world is the structured unfolding of consciousness into form. It's how consciousness expresses itself, structures itself. He even suggests that quantum fields themselves might be conscious entities possessing some form of free will.
Wow, tying consciousness right into fundamental physics.
Deeply. And then finally, we have Chris Langan, known for his cognitive theoretic model of the universe, the CTMU.
Which is notoriously dense, right? Highly formalized metalogic.
Extremely dense, but the core conclusion when you unpack it is actually beautifully simple. It's a form of monistic idealism.
Monistic meaning one fundamental thing.
Exactly. Langan asserts reality is a self-excited monism, a single self-aware entity that is somehow both the object being known and the subject doing the knowing.
The universe observing itself.
In a sense, yes. He calls this universal consciousness infocognition, a kind of fusion of information and cognition. For Langan, this entity is the mind of God, encompassing all of reality within itself.
Okay, how does the physical world fit into that, if everything is this one conscious mind?
Langan uses a unique linguistic metaphor. He describes the universe as a self-simulating and self-configuring self-processing language. SCSPL, he calls it.
Reality as a language.
A language that writes itself, reads itself, and understands itself. The physical universe we observe is just a necessary logical closure, a kind of subset or output of this vast, conscious self-processing structure.
So like the output on the screen of a giant self-aware computer program that is reality.
That's a decent analogy, yes. The mind is the algorithm, the data, the processor all rolled into one. The physical is the result generated by this self-aware linguistic process.
Okay, so pulling it all together, from the philosopher, the cognitive scientist, the engineer, the logician, the message is incredibly consistent, isn't it?
Amazingly so. The materialist hypothesis. It's busted, they argue. We live in a reality that is, at its core, fundamentally conscious, and the physical world we experience is merely the appearance, the representation, the output of that consciousness.
Mind, officially. Blown.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how even these thinkers dealing with hard science, complex logic, Hoffman, Kastrup, they realize they need metaphors, accessible allegories.
Because if the physical world isn't fundamental, if it's an illusion or a representation, you need a way to explain how that illusion works, right? Why does it feel so real?
Exactly. You need to describe the mechanism of the illusion for the listener, to grasp it.
And that's where Hoffman's interface theory really shines, doesn't it? He doesn't just say physical reality, space, time, objects is secondary. He says it's literally a user interface, a UI or MUI, multimodal user interface.
Let's just spend a moment on that desktop analogy again, because it's so powerful for getting this across.
Okay.
So you look to your computer desktop, you see that icon, maybe the blue recycling bin, you interact with it, right? You drag files to it, you double-click it, a window opens.
Sure. Standard stuff.
But that icon, does it bear any resemblance, visually, spatially, chemically, to the complex hardware, the electrical signals, the actual binary code that it represents?
No, none at all. It's just a picture, a shortcut.
Precisely. It's purely a functional tool.
Yeah.
A shortcut, as you say. And Hoffman argues, our perception of reality is exactly like that because our senses evolved purely for survival, those fitness payoffs.
They didn't evolve to show us the truth.
No. The UI, our perceived reality, is simplified to the absolute extreme needed for survival. We don't need to perceive the true network of interacting conscious agents underneath it all. In fact, he argues, if we did perceive reality accurately,
What would happen?
it would be so overwhelmingly complex, such a flood of data, we'd likely be paralyzed. We'd be evolutionarily unfit.
Yeah.
Dead, basically.
So hiding reality from us is actually an adaptive advantage.
It's the ultimate evolutionary magic trick. Reality is veiled for our own benefit. The interface is reliable. Yes, you can trust that fire's hot, that falling off a cliff will hurt you. That consistency is key.
But reliability doesn't equal truth.
Not objective truth about the underlying structure, no. If you could somehow peel back the UI, Hoffman says, you wouldn't find smaller and smaller particles. You'd find the interacting conscious agents.
Okay, different metaphor now. Kastrup uses a psychological one, dissociation.
Right. If the universal mind at large is the only fundamental reality, then our sense of being a separate individual, an I, an ego, that's the bit that has been dissociated.
Segmented off from the whole.
Exactly. And he often uses the analogy of the brain's function as a reducing valve or a filter. Aldous Huxley used that term too.
A reducing valve, meaning it cuts down the signal.
Yes. The universal mind is experiencing, well, everything, potentially.
Yeah.
It's vast, maybe infinite in its scope. For a stable individual human experience to occur, that vastness has to be localized, reduced, filtered down into an ego.
And the brain is the physical mechanism that does the filtering.
That's the idea. The brain acts as the boundary, like a knot in the stream of consciousness that creates a localized whirlpool. That whirlpool is your individual experience.
So the physical world we all seem to share, how does that arise in this model?
It's the shared perceptual field that emerges when these different dissociated alters, these whirlpools, interact or observe the underlying mental processes of the one mind from their limited viewpoints.
We're all fragments of the same mind, looking at the mind's inner workings, but from different restricted angles, creating a shared external reality.
You've got it. And when death occurs, the whirlpool simply dissolves. The boundary created by the brain vanishes. The localized consciousness doesn't cease to exist. It just reintegrates back into the mind at large. The separation was the temporary state, the illusion.
Okay. Shifting again to Faggin and Langan, their allegories feel a bit more abstract, right? Touching on information, quantum stuff.
They do. Faggin, arguing from his quantum perspective, often points to things like entanglement.
Where particles stay connected instantaneously no matter how far apart they are. Spooky action at a distance.
Right. And Faggin suggests that this weird non-local connection isn't just a physical quirk. It might be allegorical of the underlying unity and non-locality of consciousness itself. Consciousness operating outside the normal rules of space and time.
So quantum mechanics might be giving us hints about the nature of the conscious ground of reality.
That's what he implies. He argues that all the, quote, meaningless information of quantum physics, the probabilities, the wave functions, that's what actually hides the truly meaningful reality of consciousness beneath it.
We're studying the deep rules of the interface, the code, maybe, but mistaking it for the conscious programmer.
That's a great way to put it. We're mistaking the rules of the functional representation for the fundamental reality itself.
And Langan, with his reality as language idea.
The CTMU describes reality as a self-simulating mind. The universe is like this vast, incredibly complex language that is simultaneously writing itself, reading itself, and understanding itself. It's the ultimate self-referential loop.
The whole universe as one ongoing thought process.
Essentially, yes, a cognitive process, which makes the physical universe we see a kind of expression, a necessary unfolding or output of this infinite self-aware mind or language.
Okay. And this is where maybe someone like Dan Brown comes in, reflecting these ideas in popular culture.
Exactly. Brown's novels, especially the later ones like Origin, often center on this quest for a hidden truth, the secret of secrets. And often that secret turns out to be some kind of, well, noetic discovery about consciousness.
Noetic meaning related to the mind or intellect.
Right. A discovery that, if revealed, would completely overturn our standard materialist assumptions about reality.
So he taps into that feeling that there's a hidden layer to reality.
He does. He takes these deep philosophical ideas, like the brain being a receiver for a universal mind rather than a generator, and he packages them as ancient mysteries, hidden codes, scientific breakthroughs.
He allegorizes the philosophical quest itself, the idea that the truth about reality, its conscious unity, is veiled somehow.
And that uncovering it is the ultimate prize. It's a very effective way to bring these potentially paradigm-shifting ideas to a massive audience.
Okay, so if we kind of accept this framework for a moment, that the physical world is an interface, The brain is a filter. This completely changes how we have to think about the self, doesn't it? Who am I then? Who is the user of Hoffman's interface, or consciousness being filtered by Kastrup's valve?
Absolutely. The convergence in this idea of the brain as a filter receiver, not a generator, is maybe the most radical implication for our sense of self.
Because it means I am not my brain.
Precisely. If Faggin is right, the brain is just the complex hardware that my consciousness operates. If Kastrup is right, the brain is the apparatus that localizes the universal consciousness into my specific viewpoint. Either way, the self isn't produced by the meat. The self is the operator, or the localized segment of the one mind.
And the immediate consequence of that is persistence. What happens after death?
Well, if consciousness is primary, and the brain is just the filter or receiver, then it strongly implies that the self, the core subjective experience, doesn't necessarily end when the brain stops functioning.
Like Kastrup suggests, the dissociation ends.
Exactly. The individual alter simply stops being segmented off. It reintegrates with mind at large. The feeling of being a separate, isolated self disappears because that separation was the temporary condition created by the filter.
Which leads us right into this idea of the illusion of multiplicity.
Yes, that core feeling most of us have of being an isolated ego trapped inside a skull, separate from everyone and everything else. These thinkers are saying that feeling is an artifact, a necessary consequence of the filtering or dissociation process that allows for individual experience, but an illusion nonetheless.
True reality is unified, monistic. One thing.
That's the common thread. Langan describes it beautifully, doesn't he? The individual soul, he says, is the universal mind achieving self-awareness in a specific, unique form.
So we're not separate entities, but unique perspectives of the same fundamental entity.
Perfectly put. We are individualized viewpoints of the one mind.
Now, Faggin has a slightly different take on this unity, doesn't he, with his Thucydides?
He does. It's a more, perhaps, quantum-flavored explanation. Faggin proposes that reality is built from fundamental units of consciousness, irreducible conscious entities. He calls them ceti.
Cetides. Okay, what are they like?
They are the absolute base layer. Each ceti possesses some rudimentary form of subjective experience and maybe even free will. Think of them as the pixels of consciousness.
So how do you get from these basic conscious pixels to something as complex as a human mind, a unified self?
Through entanglement. Faggin suggests that cerities can entangle, linking together to form new, unified conscious entities with much greater complexity.
So entanglement isn't just for quantum particles, it's how consciousness builds itself up.
In his model, yes. When enough cerities combine and entangle in the right way, perhaps scaffolded by the complexity of a brain, they form a higher-order unified consciousness, what you experience as yourself.
So it's a way to get complex, unified subjectivity, my single point of view emerging from fundamental conscious ingredients, while still maintaining the ultimate unity of the underlying conscious field.
Exactly. It's like a conscious quantum version of emergence, but starting from consciousness itself, not from matter.
Okay, all of this represents a complete, well, you called it a typological reversal of cause and effect.
Yes. Instead of the standard materialist view, matter is the cause, consciousness is the effect, somehow.
They flip it. Consciousness is the cause, and matter, the brain, the physical world, that's the effect, or the representation, or the appearance.
Right. And this reversal has really profound consequences when you think about technology, especially the quest for artificial general intelligence, AGI.
How so?
Well, think about Faggin's point particularly. He argues consciousness is fundamentally non-computational. It's based on irreducible qualia, that subjective feeling.
Which computers processing symbols presumably lack.
That's his argument. Therefore, any purely materialist AI, one based solely on complex information processing, like our current deep learning models, will never achieve genuine subjective experience, true qualia.
They can simulate intelligence, simulate understanding, maybe even simulate emotions.
Brilliantly. They could become incredibly convincing mimics of human thought and behavior. But if Faggin and these other idealists are right, they will remain sophisticated philosophical zombies, meaning systems that are behaviorally indistinguishable from a conscious being, but lack any actual intersubjective life. All processing, no feeling, all syntax, no semantics. They can talk about red, but they can't experience red.
Because they lack the fundamental conscious stuff, the cerities, or they aren't part of the mind at large in the right way.
Precisely. A truly conscious AI, in this view, might require a completely different approach, one that taps into the fundamental conscious nature of reality itself, not just computation, if that's even possible.
Okay, this brings us to the final part of our deep dive today, and honestly, maybe the most surprising connection for many listeners. If modern science, philosophy, engineering are all converging on this mind-first reality, how does this line up with, say, ancient spiritual traditions?
And it's not just a vague similarity. We found really striking specific resonances between these modern models, Kastrup, Hoffman, Faggin, Langan, and the core metaphysical framework you find in the Bible, especially concerning the distinction between spiritual and material existence.
It's not just thematic, you said earlier, it's structural.
Yes. Both the modern idealist consensus and key biblical metaphysics share a foundational premise. The unseen reality is primary and causal.
Okay, let's break that down. The modern side. We've got Kastrup's mind at large, Hoffman's conscious agents, Faggin's quantum consciousness. They all assert that consciousness is the primary permanent reality, the eternal ground of being.
Right. Now compare that to the biblical assertion. You find this stated so clearly in 2 Corinthians 4.18. It encourages believers to focus not on the things which are seen, but on the things which are not seen. Why? For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal.
So, a direct hierarchy. The material world, the seen, the physical is temporary, secondary. The unseen, the spiritual, the conscious ground is primary, eternal.
It's the same hierarchy. Right. The material is derivative. And look at how creation itself is described. Hebrews 11.3 says that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible.
Wow. What is seen was not made out of what was visible. That aligns almost perfectly with the idealist claim that the physical world emerges from a non-physical and non-visible ground.
It's a direct parallel. The physical is an expression and appearance, not the source material.
Okay, what about the nature of that source? We talked about Kastrup's universal mind, Faggin's quantum field, Langan's CTMU, or mind of God. This idea of a unifying conscious source behind everything.
Well, where does that resonate in the Bible? Immediately, you think of the Johannine prologue, right? John 1.1-3. In the beginning was the word logos, and the word was with God, and the word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made.
The logos, often interpreted metaphysically as the divine reason, the ordering principle, the consciousness that generates and structures reality.
Exactly. And think about Langan's infocognition reality as a self-processing language. It sounds remarkably like a modern high-tech description of the creative ordering word or logos.
And there's also the idea of immanence, isn't there? Langan's monism, where reality exists within God's mind.
That finds a clear echo in texts like Acts 17.28. Quoting a poet, it says, "In him we live and move and have our being." It suggests our very existence unfolds within the divine consciousness, not separate from it. That's very close to Kastrup's mind at large model.
Okay, let's go back to the idea of limited perception. Hoffman's user interface, Kastrup's reducing valve or dissociative boundary. Our senses filter reality. They don't reveal it fully. They're functional, but obscuring.
And what's the classic biblical metaphor for this? It's the veil, isn't it? Or seeing unclearly. Think of 1 Corinthians 13.12. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully.
Seeing in a mirror dimly, or a reflection as in a mirror, that sounds exactly like Hoffman's interface. It's not the real thing, just a limited, perhaps distorted functional representation.
It is the mirror, the dim reflection. It's the veil of materiality, hiding the true structure of reality until some future, fuller knowing. It's the UI.
And the body itself. The modern view sees the body brain as this limiting vessel. The filter, the reducing valve, the thing that localizes universal consciousness into an individual ego, creating separation.
How is the body often viewed in Scripture? Frequently as a temporary dwelling, a tent, but also as a condition that imposes a kind of separation from the divine or the ultimate reality.
Like in 2 Corinthians 5.6, therefore we are always confident and know that as long as we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord.
Precisely. Being at home in the body means being away from the Lord. The body is portrayed as this temporary container, this condition that prevents the full, direct, unified experience of the spiritual realm. That maps incredibly well onto Kastrup's idea of the body, creating the dissociative boundary of the conscious alter.
Okay, one last connection. The individual self. We heard Langan and Faggin suggest the individual is a unique manifestation of the universal mind, or the universal mind becoming self-aware in a particular form. Not separate, but a localized expression.
And the biblical parallel has to be the doctrine of the Imago Dei, humanity created in the image of God, from Genesis 1.27.
So the individual soul or consciousness isn't just separate from God, but in some way reflects or is a partial manifestation of the divine consciousness.
That's a common interpretation. Our individual minds reflect the divine nature, like a facet of a diamond reflects the whole light, but they are veiled, localized, limited by our physical existence.
Yeah.
The core truth about the universe isn't just out there in particles, it's reflected in here, in the nature of consciousness itself.
Wow, the parallels are genuinely striking when you lay them out like that. Hashtag tag outro. So wrapping up this deep dive, it's revealed this really powerful intellectual convergence, something few people might expect.
Yeah, from cognitive science equations with Hoffman to microprocessor insights from Faggin to rigorous philosophy from Kastrup and dense meta logic from Langan.
The consensus, surprisingly, is robust. Consciousness seems to be the bedrock, the fundamental reality.
And the physical world. It's looking more like a functional interface, maybe a localized dream, perhaps a symbolic appearance needed for us to even have localized experiences.
And what's maybe most extraordinary is how this modern anti-materialist stance seems to build a bridge.
A bridge between what?
Between cutting-edge, data-informed, rational inquiry and ancient spiritual wisdom. It offers a contemporary framework, a rational lens, to understand claims that historically often required pure faith.
You mean the claim that the unseen, the conscious, the eternal reality is fundamentally causal, that it's superior to the seen, material, temporary world?
Exactly. It puts philosophical and even scientific legs under that ancient intuition.
And the collective work of all these thinkers, it really implies something profound about our search for knowledge, doesn't it?
Which is?
That the grand quest might not be about discovering what's out there in the vastness of space-time. Maybe it's more about removing the veil.
Yeah.
Lifting the interface, perceiving the conscious reality that we already are underneath the illusion.
Which leads us to that final provocative thought, the one we want to leave you, the listener, with today. It resonates through all these different sources we've discussed.
If this physical world truly is just an adaptive UI, carefully crafted by evolution or maybe by dissociation, purely for survival, if it's just a consistent functional tool specifically designed to hide the underlying conscious reality,
then what would happen? What could happen if you actively, consciously sought to bypass that interface, to peek behind the curtain? What hidden secrets, what profound realities might lie just beyond the familiar, functional